I was having your boy Rico from Street Scores, and the Commanders have made some pretty significant moves today. First of all, they signed wide receiver Byron Pringle. Ex-Chiefs wide receiver, used to play for Eric Bieniemy once upon a time, but recently played with the Bears last season. So we got to take a look at, does he actually even have a good chance of making the roster? Is he just a camp body that we're bringing in just to take up space? Or does he actually have an honest chance of being one of the 6, or maybe we stretch it to 7 receivers that actually make the real 53-man roster going into the regular season, week 1 heading into the Arizona Cardinals? Like you can see in all of my thumbnails, I have a countdown leading to that week 1 game, so make sure you peep that in all of the calendars. But again, we're going to take a look at the entire wide receiver position as well. We're going to take a look at every single player that's in there, because we're in the double digits, and we got to narrow this down to, again, like 6 or 7, and we're going to try to see who has the most realistic chances of actually making the roster, and is Byron Pringle one of them? And then also the Commanders put my boy tight end Rodgers on IR, and also cut quarterback DeMorat. And that's really interesting, because even as a Georgia Bulldog fan, I'm like, it's got to be anybody but Jake Fromm. But for some reason, Jake Fromm was able to beat out DeMorat. But then again, this is before we got to training camp, so maybe Tim didn't get his chance. But we're going to talk about that as well. But before we dive into everything, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button, so you get a notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Like I said, I'm coming with constant updates, daily updates for training camp. So I'm going to send y'all and upload the clips of everything that happened in practice, so y'all can see them for yourselves. And then I'm going to also break down everything that happened in practice, position group by position group, every day that we get the information, because some practices are closed off to the public, so I won't be able to break down those days. But any days where any of the reporters giving us any information, you will get all of it. And again, we're talking about every position group, going from quarterback to running back, wide receiver, offensive line, all the way down, good and bad. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I'm not just going to sit here and only give y'all the good information. I'm going to give you the bad news as well. Injury updates, anything like that. Hopefully we don't have any of those, but we'll see. Also, of course, I'm still coming with the film sessions for the entire rookie class, so stay tuned for that. Ricky Stromberg is next, and any other random updates going on in Commander Land. And without further ado, let's get it.
You tell your family you can be a commander.
All right, so breaking news, the Washington Commanders have signed free agent wide receiver Byron Pringle to a 1-year deal. Pringle played for the Chiefs from 2019 to 2021 before joining the Bears last season. He rejoins Eric Bieniemy and also brings over some kick return experience. So this is a guy we're bringing over to compete with that kick return spot, which is really interesting, because we already have Dax Milne as our previous starting punt returner, our assumed starting punt returner, entering training camp, entering the preseason and the regular season. But like I've said, I call him automatic fair catch. He's really safe. The reason why Ron Rivera and all of those guys love him, especially Ron Rivera, who's Mr. Play It Safe himself, Dax Milne doesn't muff punts. That's, I mean, one thing about it, he will not muff a punt. But again, I call him automatic fair catch, because I don't really expect him to return it any further than where he catches it, whether he calls a fair catch or not. So it would be nice to bring somebody in with some explosion. So that's why we brought in Casimir Allen out of UCLA as an undrafted free agent, but he's been dealing with a hamstring issue. I've heard recently that it sounds like it got better and he may be competing as well, but maybe the Commanders aren't willing to wait on him. So now they brought in Byron Pringle, who also has experience with Eric Bieniemy back in his days with the Kansas City Chiefs, another potential punt returner, but also the guy that can contribute to the receiver room. But again, we're going to dive into the entire receiving room soon, but we got to talk about Byron Pringle first before we start to deliberate whether or not he actually has an honest chance of making his team. I mean, walking away from this video, I'm going to go ahead and tell you now, I'm not going to clickbait you. I wouldn't bet my life savings on him making the roster. It's not like we just signed Tyreek Hill or anything, but by the end of this video, we should be able to come up with a decent conclusion as to whether or not he has a good chance of making this roster. Is he just a camp body, or is this a guy that is an honest threat to take somebody's spot? Like most notably like a Dax Milne. We gotta see. Now, of course, it's just a 1-year deal, a 1-year prove-it deal. So he's about to put us all into this. This is his next chance to get like a bigger contract or anything like that. So we'll see how this goes. Now, when he was playing for Eric Bieniemy in Kansas City for 3 years, he caught 42 passes for 568 yards and 5 touchdowns 2 seasons ago, which is pretty good on like a per catch basis. That's pretty explosive. He was in Chicago last year. He's only 29 years old, and he's entering his 5th NFL season. So this guy has a lot to fight for, man. I'm telling you, these 1-year prove-it deals, especially for the cheap, Like, I'm pretty sure this guy caught. It's one of those things where this guy's going to give it his all, and it's only reward. There's no risk to it, so I'm really excited. Now, he has 67 catches and almost 900 reception yards and 7 touchdowns in 3 seasons with Kansas City. The 42 catches for 568 yards and 5 touchdowns was in 1 season, but overall, his entire time with Eric Bieniemy, 900 reception yards, 7 touchdowns in 3 seasons. And JP Finley is basically saying this is a real signing. This is not just a camp body. Bottom of the wide receiver depth chart, very much a competition for the Commanders, and I agree. Like I already said, especially after assigning the money badger, Michael Badgley, the kicker that we just brought in, I would say our top 3 toughest camp battles are kicker, the 2 starting outside corner spots, and left guard, whereas like we just really truly don't exactly know who's going to be the starter, but punt returner is an underrated one, and now wide receiver depth is one of them as well. I feel like a lot of our position groups, we pretty much know for the most part who's going to round out the starters and even the backups and the depth pieces, but some things like depth wide receiver, those last 2 or 3 spots, man, it's up in the air right now. We have no idea. But man, this guy brings some speed to him. Again, unlike Dax Milne, Casimir Allen, and Byron Pringle have some speed and explosion to their game that, again, Dax Milne doesn't provide. Dax Milne is, again, very safe, but this is another guy that comes with some ceiling to him as far as returning goes. He's 6'1", 203 pounds, so a pretty stocky built guy, and still runs a 4.46 according to his combine, but he runs even faster than that on tape, in my opinion. So this guy's interesting. Shouts out to my boy Josh Taylor. Make sure you follow him on Twitter, Josh Taylor FB. He said this about Byron Pringle. He said Pringle is low-key a baller, great blocker, love his cuts, ability to get upfield, and his catch radius. Really liking his tape from Kansas City and Chicago so far. This is a legit signing, not a camp body. Again, once again, somebody else that has gone back and watched the tape and said this guy is not a camp body. This guy has the ability to actually have an impact, not only just on special teams, but on offense as well, which is interesting because Dax Milne even contributes on offense as a receiver sometimes, but he was mostly just our starting punt returner last year. If Byron Pringle or Casimir Allen are better than him at punt returning, they're just simply going to make the roster over him, especially, again, with them having higher ceilings and higher potentials, something that we can tap into, develop, and they can end up being a better player than Dax Milne has the potential to be because he's limited athleticism-wise. And then just to talk about it real quick, Pro Football Focus-wise, last year with the Bears, he had a 62.9 overall grade with a 64.7 receiving grade, just to go ahead and throw that out there. But again, 2 years ago, 2021, his most notable season when he was with Kansas City with Eric Bieniemy, again, 42 receptions on 57 targets, 568 receiving yards, 5 receiving touchdowns. He had a 66.5 overall grade and a 65 receiving grade, which is not bad at all. And again, running basically a 4.45 at 6'1", 200 pounds is really explosive. That's pretty fast. And then again, I think he's even faster on tape than his numbers show. So I'm really excited about this signing potentially. I think he can actually go up there and do something for us, man. I'm telling you, training camp is going to be really interesting. A lot of people are going to be focusing on left guard, the outside corners and stuff like that. We're going to be focusing on Sam Howell's development, but there are a lot of random underrated camp battles going on. And I'm telling you, this wide receiver depth is really interesting, which is a good time to dive into now, because if you think about it, again, going to keep probably 5 or 6 wide receivers, the very maximum 7, the very maximum at most 7, but I think it's going to be somewhere between 5 or 6. So let's already count out the guys that are automatic. We already know Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, and even more than likely Dyami Brown are an automatic 4. So from there, we have 1, maybe 2, and I highly doubt it, but 3 spots available, which leaves you with recently signed Byron Pringle, who when you go to ourlads.com, they have him as one of the guys at the top of the depth chart, like literally dead even with Dyami Brown and Dax Milne right behind Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and Curtis Samuel. Literally second string left wide receiver type of stuff. They already have him above all of the other receivers we're going to talk about except for Dax Milne. But again, you have Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, and Dyami Brown as your top 4, with 1 or 2 spots more than likely open. Again, I highly doubt 3, but we can even do it just for hypothetical purposes. Let's just say for some reason we keep 7 wide receivers. I highly doubt it. I think it's more likely for us to keep 1 than 3, but more than likely maybe like a 2. But we have Dax Milne beyond that, Byron Pringle, Marcus Kemp, who Eric Bieniemy already loves, Terry McLaurin has already said just a few weeks ago that he's like an on-field coach, helping everybody, all of the receivers, even including him, who's a top 10 receiver in the NFL, top 8 receiver, arguably top 5. He's been needing help learning Eric Bieniemy's system and what Eric Bieniemy exactly wants from his receivers and things like that. And Marcus Kemp has been a huge help there. That's just one side of it. Then also he's a strong special teams contributor. Like his blocking skills are phenomenal. If you go back and look at that Eagles Chiefs Super Bowl, Marcus Kemp was one of the biggest reasons that the Chiefs were able to put that game away with some of the block. He blocked like 3 people in that one big, I believe it was Kadarius Toney return near the end of the game for them to pretty much ice it and go ahead and win it, run out the clock and all of that type of stuff. He was like the lead blocker, literally blocked like 3 people on that play. It was phenomenal. We don't really have anybody else on roster that can do something like that. We have a bunch of return specialists and potentially guys that we can ask to be starting punt returners and kick returners, but we don't just have certified wide receivers going out there blocking people out of the play. I mean, blocking 3 people in one play and taking them out of the play is insane. And then on top of that, he's like the tallest receiver on the roster. He's the only other guy that's even sort of built like Cam Sims. You also have Bryson Tremaine out of Stanford. Those are the only 2 guys that just really have some serious height to them. They're like 6'5" or more type of stuff. So he already has 3 reasons why he's quite likely to get one of those spots. And again, you still have Dax Milne and Byron Pringle, who we just signed. Then you also have Mitchell Tinsley. I mean, that's a really talented guy. He's the one that we signed as an undrafted free agent after the draft from Penn State. But if you remember his previous college, he was the one catching the majority of those passes from Bailey Zapp. Remember, he was like setting college football records, and Mitchell Tinsley was like his #1 receiver, the best receiver out of the entire group. And that's why he was able to transfer to Penn State, because Penn State saw him at that lower level college and was like, let's give him a chance. And he was showing a little bit of promise for Penn State as well, but then he ended up getting hurt. But he's still like a baby little Jahan Dotson kind of clone almost. So he has a strong chance of being a real wide receiver threat at the NFL level. And that's one of those guys that I would be afraid of us cutting in training camp and another team picking him up, and then he ends up balling out. Then you also have Kazmir Allen again. I thought he was our leading candidate to be our punt returner, especially other than Dax Milne. I mean, with them bringing in all of these potential punt returners, they clearly don't love Dax Milne. I'm pretty sure Ron Rivera loves Dax Milne, but it seems like Eric Bieniemy's like, nah, man, we got to bring some explosion, a guy that can flip field position, and Dax Milne isn't that. He's very safe, but let's find somebody that's safe and also explosive on top of that. So Kazmir Allen, I mean, he's honestly, before we signed Byron Pringle, I thought had the best chance of winning the punt return job if Eric Bieniemy and Ron Rivera and all of those guys, Martin Mayhew, want to go a more explosive route on punt returns. So you have him, but then he's been dealing with a hamstring issue. And then, like I said earlier, Bryson Tremaine out of Stanford. Him and Marcus Kemp are our tallest receivers, and it's like a pretty big gap between them and the next few guys. Then you have Jalen Sample and Zion Bowens. I mean, it's a loaded wide receiver class. Don't forget Kyrick McGowan, who's out here making plays, rookie mini cams, OTAs, mandatory mini cams. He just always seems to make plays, and he's another guy competing for that starting punt return job. He lost it last year to Dax Milne, but you never know if he comes back with a vengeance this offseason. So that right there is already 13 receivers I just named fighting for 5-6 spots. Again, highly doubted, but the very, very max 7. But I think most realistically, 5 or 6 spots. And again, 4 of them are already taken by Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, De'Ami Brown, and Curtis Samuel. So out of all of those other 9 people, they're fighting for 1 or 2 spots. Again, the very max 3. So does Byron Pringle have an honest shot of making this roster? I think he does. Again, especially with him having the easiest path being him being the starting punt returner. Eric Bieniemy trusts this guy. I mean, he has no attachment to Dax Milne. He didn't draft Dax Milne. He didn't sign Dax Milne. Dax Milne was here when Eric Bieniemy became the offensive coordinator for this team. So I don't believe, even though Dax Milne was our starting punt returner all of last season, and he already beat out a few players last offseason through the Commanders training camp and all of that type of stuff, that has no effect on Eric Bieniemy's decision. Like, cool, I saw what you did for the Commanders last year under Ron Rivera, but that was under Scott Turner. That was under other management, basically. We have new ownership, new starting quarterback. I'm here as the new offensive coordinator and assistant head coach. Not just offensive coordinator, but assistant head coach. So everybody's starting on a clean slate right now, especially on the punt returner side. But Eric Bieniemy's made it clear that pretty much everybody has to earn their keep. Terry McLaurin has to go out there and prove that he's the wide receiver #1. Everybody, the offensive lineman, Charles Leno, wasn't just automatically the starting left tackle and all of that type of stuff. He's not handing out any favors. He's not just allowing people to just simply take a job because they had it last year. So Dax Milne, you're sitting on even playing field with Byron Pringle, Casimir Allen, Kyrick McGowan, or anybody else that's trying to compete for this starting punt return job. And honestly, if I had to say, because Eric Bieniemy is now our offensive coordinator and assistant head coach, Byron Pringle may even have an edge over Dax Milne right now for the starting punt return spot. So does Byron Pringle have an honest shot of making this team? He does. Again, he provides explosive potential. Eric Bieniemy has seen him do punt returns for the Kansas City Chiefs. He probably trusts him a little bit better. So I'm telling you, Byron Pringle has an honest shot of making this roster. Would I put my life savings on him making it? No. Again, for the odds that I've already explained, 9 guys fighting for 1 or 2 spots at very, very ridiculous max 3. I don't like my odds there for a guy that we just signed. But again, training camp hasn't started yet, so he pretty much is starting even with everybody else. Again, for reasons I've already explained with Eric Bieniemy just getting here while everybody's starting on an even slate. Nobody has an advantage. I think he has a good chance, but I wouldn't put my life savings on it at all. But I'm really excited about him, man. His explosive potential, him and Casimir Allen easily provide the most explosive potential out of our entire unit right now as far as punt returns. Of course, Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel, you include them, they're at the top, but we don't want to risk them getting hurt on anything silly and trivial like punt returns. We can ask somebody else to do it. We want them to do everything they need to do on the offensive end. So that's where Byron Pringle comes in. And again, the trust that Eric Bieniemy probably has with him just coming from Kansas City and already prior experience, a guy that he doesn't have to coach up too much to get part of the program. Again, you already have Marcus Kemp, you add in Byron Pringle. Those are 2 guys that were already in your system that you don't have to micromanage and baby and hold their hands along the way. So that's another advantage that he has. And then also lastly, before we get up out of here, the Commanders move my boy tight end Armani Rodgers to IR, of course. That's expected. I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner. And then we also released quarterback Tim DeMorat, and I'm actually pretty surprised about that, honestly, because even as a Georgia Bulldog fan, I just don't feel like Jake Fromm is it, but clearly Jake Fromm has done enough to end up with Tim DeMorat released. And speaking of Bailey Zapp earlier when we were talking about Mitchell Tinsley at receiver, I think Tim DeMorat is basically a clone of that, a guy that you give an honest shot at the NFL level because he's super balled out at Fordham. It was a low level of competition, but he basically had a Bailey Zapp year where he was just doing unprecedented things. But again, it was at a lower level, and I just feel like he didn't necessarily get the shot he deserved. And if they feel like Jake Fromm is the better quarterback and he should be our 3rd string quarterback, that's really interesting. Because again, he had Bobby McCain out here looking like a all-pro Hall of Fame safety that last game of the season against the Giants a couple of years ago. I don't trust him. I've seen what he did for my Georgia Bulldogs. I've seen him in practice a couple of times. I don't like it, but if he beat out Tim DeMorat, maybe poor Timmy was just that bad. I don't know. But I just remember they changed the rules to where you can have 3 active quarterbacks every game day now, and they won't necessarily take up an active roster spot. Every team is allotted an extra spot for a 3rd quarterback no matter what. So you have 3 healthy quarterbacks ready to go. We don't have to talk about Logan Thomas potentially coming in as a reserve quarterback. Hope we never get to that point anyway. I just hope Sam Howell stays healthy and we never have to worry about that. So Sam Howell as our starter, Jacoby Brissett is our backup, and as of right now, Jake Fromm is our 3rd stringer. I mean, I'd prefer to bring in Steven Montez to compete with Jake Fromm, but Jake Fromm must be doing something right that I haven't seen yet for him to beat out Tim DeMorat, especially this soon, where you don't just cut another position. You just like, oh, Tim, we're good on you. We'll just stick with Jake Fromm. So he must have done something, and maybe he's impressed them in ways that he hasn't impressed me yet. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Of course, man, get in the comment section. Let me know about everything I discussed in this video, like Byron Pringle and this entire receiver group. Who would you pick as of right now? If you had to pick 6 receivers, let's say 6. We're not even going to do 7 because, again, I highly doubt that. Say 6 receivers make the team. We already have an automatic for those last 2 spots between those other 9 guys. Who do you have making those spots? Do you have Marcus Kemp and Byron Pringle? Because both of those guys came from Kansas City. I can easily see it being those 6, easily. With the prior experience with Eric Bieniemy already knowing the system and things like that. Or do you have another scenario? Do you see Dax Milne making it because he already was our starting punt returner last year and he made some pretty good plays on offense? I mean, it's just crazy. Marcus Kemp again with the size and his niche of being a special teams blocker and all of that, and he's like the veteran of the group, one of the older receivers of the group and stuff like that. It's a really interesting situation. So let me know in the comment section how you feel about the receiving group, and of course the moves that we made to put Armani Rodgers on IR. Are you as sad as I am to hear, to remember that he's hurt, to be reminded of the fact that he's hurt, and we're not going to have that explosive weapon on offense this year, especially under Eric Bieniemy. Armani Rodgers with Eric Bieniemy would have been crazy. And of course, let me know how you feel about Tim DeMorat being released and how that reflects on Jake Fromm and on our entire QB situation. And also, of course, man, I appreciate all the support, man. Shouts out to all of my sponsors, especially my Pro Bowl sponsors, whose names you see scrolling on the screen right now. I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm out.